Thank you to everyone that has joined me this evening. We are going to go ahead and get started. This is the second night in our 5-week webinar series called Engage in 5. And so I just, once again, thank you for joining me this evening. Hopefully we will be able to just experience a little bit of enjoyment this evening as we come together as educators, as learners, trying to learn a little bit more about how we can better engage our students. So let's start with the big picture before we zoom into one of our 5 facets. So the overall picture is this CRAVE model of student motivation. And so if we're wondering, what is it that makes students tick? How do we get students to engage in learning? You as an educator, you're bringing interest, you're bringing content, you're bringing energy, you're trying to find fun activities, and sometimes it works, and then sometimes it doesn't. So how can you be a little bit more strategic with your instruction? And the answer is not necessarily to ramp up your instruction, because that's always going to be a hit or miss proposition, because you don't know what the other part of the equation is. The hidden variable is really student motivation. What is it that actually motivates students to learn? This is coming from over 30 years of social cognitive research and theory and practice and psychology and just good old common sense from education. And we get these 5 facets of student motivation. So the quick overview is competence. That's what we did in our very first session. If you missed that session, you can go to aarondaffern.com/engage and you can find links to all the recordings. But competence is really feeling that you have the ability to get something done. When you feel competent, when you feel like whatever the task is in front of you is within your wheelhouse, if it's in your range of, yes, I can do that, well, then that's going to make you feel like you can do it. But when something is way beyond your ability, right? If you have difficulty walking down to the end of the block and you get short of breath just because you don't work out that much, and then someone says, hey, let's go run a marathon, 26.2 miles. You're going to be demotivated because that's way beyond your competence. Sometimes asking students to do just a simple activity is beyond their level of competence. So we need to find ways to build their competence, because that is what increases their motivation. The second facet is relationships. That's what we're going to dive into tonight. Next week is autonomy. Then we get into value. And then finally, our 5th and final week will be emotions. And then once we learn all of those 5 facets, we really unlock the puzzle that is the student motivational brain. And what does it take for us as educators to leverage what they naturally want to do in order to increase engagement and motivation? So tonight we're going to focus just on relationships. Now, this is one that most educators just know intuitively. We know that education is built on relationships and learning is built on relationships, but it's also borne out in a lot of research. So let's look at that in just a moment. To let you know, there is a link in the handout, which I will put in the chat box later. It's also available on my webpage, aarondaffern.com/engage. But in that handout, you also have links to these 2 books. But this is where all the research can be found. And if you're a super research nerd, you can find in Solving Student Engagement, you can find the actual review of literature that shows all the research that I pull from to find these 5 themes that showed up again and again and again in all the various formats. So the first book is Solving Student Engagement. The second book is Don't Quit Your Day Job. So it's under the same umbrella of student engagement. It's just a completely different format. So if what you're learning tonight gets you excited and you want to know more, those will be 2 good resources. Links, you can find that on my website, can also be found at the last page of the handout. So let's get into relationships. What does research tell us about relationships? Why does it work? And why is it so important for us as educators to build relationships in the classroom? First, it's through positive relationships that students learn how to regulate their emotions and their behavior. Now, a lot of us get frustrated because as educators, we think we are paid to teach content. I'm a math teacher. I'm a science teacher. I'm an art teacher. I'm a music teacher. I'm a literature teacher. My job is not to teach behavior, right? If only my kids can come into my classroom well-behaved and well-mannered and know the basic norms of convention, then my job would be easier. Well, in a perfect world, you're right. But honestly, we are paid to teach behavior because we're paid to teach the whole child. And if students aren't behaving the way we want them to, then there's something that is missing. It could be a skill that's missing. They might not know any better, but 9 times out of 10, If there are students that are misbehaving, you have those same students that are disconnected. When they feel connected with you in an authentic relationship, there's genuine interest, you're not just going through the motions. It's very hard for students to act out against that unless something deep and troubling is going on, because they feel connected to you, and acting out against you is going to be like acting out against themselves. So as students watch you through that strong relationship that you build with them, you're close, you're authentic, you're vulnerable, you're genuine, they watch you, and very subconsciously, they learn to regulate their own emotions and behavior. You are that model. So if you get tired of them calling out or being out of control, or maybe their mouth is just on autopilot and they say things they don't want to, if they can watch you control yourselves and regulate your own behavior, and if they can watch you work through some things and they have that strong relationship, they will pick up what they should be doing through your own actions. So if you want to show students what to do, it not only will give them a good example, but it will also rub off on them, and it will help them regulate their emotions and behavior. Once again, this is from research. This is not just an idea or a hope. Also, positive interactions between a student and a teacher are central to everything that happens in education, but it helps develop a student's self-esteem. When a student feels seen, when they feel valued, when they feel like they're a part of the classroom, then that raises their self-esteem. And when students feel better about themselves, they're less likely to lash out. They're going to be more willing to take academic risks. Everything that you want to happen will happen when they feel that connection with you. So the positive interactions is not just positive psychology, not just rah-rah stuff. It will really help develop their character and their self-efficacy, and it builds into their competence, and it really just kind of layers on to everything else. Now, here's a very interesting thing that you might intuitively have figured out, but you've never honestly considered objectively. There's some very interesting studies out of A&M University. Dr. Jan Hughes and her colleagues did a series of research studies looking at teacher-student actions and how it affects a child's likability. And so here's a long series of events that they found. So there's a thing that they call the peer academic reputation. So let's say you get a new student in your class. His name is Samuel. Samuel is an average kid. He thinks of himself as an average kid. He's not the brightest. He's not, he's not the lowest. He's just kind of there, and he's got a decent view of his own abilities. If you start treating him negatively because you think he's unable to do things, you think he's ignorant, you think he's unable to regulate himself, and your tone of voice just shares the contempt that you have for him, right? You're short with him. He's always on your last nerve. Every day you pray that Samuel doesn't show up, and he's always there. And just that anger, that subconscious, just in the body language and the tone of voice, that gets picked up by other students. And what they found in the research studies was that other students start picking up on that, and they start treating Samuel like that. They take your lead and they take your actions as an example, and they'll start treating him like that. And he will start viewing himself lower and lower and lower as his peers start treating him like you as a teacher start treating him. And you could take a student that's an average kid, has decent self-confidence, and you can put him down in the gutter by the end of the year. And he will start taking those beliefs of the other students, that he's not good enough, he's not smart enough, he's not capable. He will start internalizing those into his own self-beliefs, and it all hinges on the interactions between a teacher and a student. So your words have power for good, but also for evil. And then finally, if you want to increase motivation and achievement out of all of these 5 facets: competence, relationships, autonomy, value, and emotions, most of you are already hitting this relationships. And if you're doing that, you're over halfway there. Relationships are the key. Relationships really start things going for the classroom. If I'm walking into a classroom, I'm doing an observation, and I'm just trying to assess where are we with motivation and engagement. These kids aren't engaged. Is it the teacher? Is it the students? Is it the environment? Is it the activity? But if there's not any relationships there, we can't do anything else until those relationships get built. That's the starting point. That's the foundation. So if you want to increase motivation and achievement, there are no shortcuts. There are going to be no quick trips around the block that you can just pass various things. There's not going to be a quick game. There's not going to be a quick iPad activity or app that you can put in front of a kid to make your boring classroom fun. You have to do the hard work, and it starts with relationships. So how do we actually get that done? Well, I've got two different ideas that I want to share with you. You might have used some of these. You might have heard some of these. You might have heard some of these ideas simply with different labels. So the first is a class meeting. So a class meeting, morning meeting, a group meeting, whatever you want to call it, this is probably one of the most powerful and impactful things you can do in the classroom to build relationships. And it's one of the least used options that I found. And there's a reason why. So what a class meeting is you literally start the day with just you and your kids. Before COVID, right, you'd sit on the carpet, you maybe sit around. Now you could just do it through Zoom. As we're starting to get back into the classrooms, right, maybe you can, with social distancing, you can kind of spread out. But the idea is to come together as a community, and you're going to respect each other, and you're just going to talk. You're just going to, outside of academics, outside of everything that you're trying to learn, all of your benchmarks, all of your STAR tests, all of your common assessments, all of your DOLs and your power standards, and all of that mess that gets pushed onto the students every single day, you connect with them as kids. You, as humans, you just come together, you just talk about stuff. And it really sets that tone for respectful learning. And it, as long as it is genuine and you are just genuinely interested, you just want to hear about kids, you want to let them talk to each other. There's no rules, there's no expectations. They're not going to do a quick write. It's not going to be graded. They just come together and they just talk and connect. That sets the tone for everything. Because once you build that climate of trust, that positive environment starts to build, now you can push your kids. Now you can hold them to high standards. And when you hold them to high standards, they're not going to get fearful. They're not going to go home and tell their parents that you hate them, because they know that you care about them, because you have taken the time to build relationships with them. But if you are pushing them either behaviorally, academically, you're giving them feedback and you really want to push them and stretch them, but you don't have that groundwork of just those strong relationships, then you're just mean. You're just tearing them down. They don't have the deposits necessary in their emotional banks for you to keep withdrawing and withdrawing and withdrawing. So if you think of it as a bank balance, this is where you deposit just little deposits every single day. And it really is open to, so many people are starting to jump on the SEL, social emotional learning bandwagon, which is fantastic. This is a great venue for it, right? So here are some components. This is just one way to do it. Everyone does their morning meeting or their class meeting or their group meeting, whatever you want to call it, slightly different. So don't worry about you having to necessarily follow a script, but this is just one example. Think 10, 20 minutes, right? There's enough time to where you can actually get a little bit of done, but not so much that it takes your whole morning, right? But you start the day and you start with a greeting. And you might think that's a little bit silly, right? Have kids shake hands, have kids fist bump, say hello. How often do kids actually do that? Look into someone's eyes, like I'm looking right into the camera right now, and just look and say, good morning. I'm glad you're here. Or I'm glad that you were in my class today. I want to learn with you today. There's not a lot of times that kids take a moment to stop and connect. And those human connections are the foundation of that positive climate and culture that you're wanting to build. It's not games. It's not prizes. It's not a token economy. It's human to human connection. So you let the kids greet each other, and you can come up, you can just Google a whole bunch of different greetings and just have them choose some silly ones, right? They could do some weird handshakes. They can do all kinds of silly stuff, right? Get them laughing. Laughter is fun. If it's fun and it's laughing, then you're doing it right. So it should be silly, should be fun. Have a little bit of a sharing activity. And this is where you have to play with it, because this is where it can really take a lot of time. So there are some different ways that you can kind of keep the time down. You can have a timer. You can let kids maybe share in small subgroups of 4, right? So rather than all 22 kids sharing at once, you put them in a groups of 4, and you share and you let them ask the question and they share, and they're heard by others, but not the entire class. But now you've cut the time down, by 75%, right? So you're getting more bang for your buck. but they're sharing just part of their life, important events, information, like what's happening, right? And then typically you'll do some type of group activity. So the sharing is going to be fun, but it's just going to be, just getting to know hobbies, interests. What did you watch? What are you doing this weekend? What's one fun thing that you are interested in? Um, Always be careful with some of those questions about, where are you going on vacation, right? Because there could be some of your students that are marginalized that they might not go on vacation, right? You don't want to really emphasize the class distinctions that may or may not be there in any socioeconomic strata that you see in your classroom. So be careful of that, right? Make sure it's accessible to everyone. But then a simple fun activity, just a group activity, just whether it be like a team building activity, there's a lot of silly things. Once again, laughter, fun, set the tone, like this is going to be a good day. I like being here. I like being with my friends. All of that is depositing into the emotional bank, and then boom, announcements. All right, so what are we doing today, guys? What's the plan? We're going to do this. We're going to do this. And then you just rock. You just go. Now, this is why classrooms don't do this. Even if you buy into this whole mushy gushy SEL stuff, which works, which is the way that education has needed to go for so long, it's that time. You're telling me, Aaron, there's no way I could spend this much time doing this. I don't have enough time to get through my lesson. How am I supposed to carve away 10 minutes? How am I supposed to carve away 15 minutes to do this? Well, I'll ask you a question. Would you rather spend 10 or 15 minutes on the front end building a positive climate? Or would you rather spend 10 or 15 minutes on the back end dealing with disruption, off-task students, unmotivated students, poor work, arguments, and peer friction, right? You have a choice. Those 10 or 15 minutes are going to come one way or the other. If you put enough deposits in on the front end, you're going to find a lot of that misbehavior vanishing on the back end because they're going to like who they're working with. You can make some clear expectations and announcements for the day. Doesn't mean the problems are never going to show up, but you can get rid of a lot of them because you set that positive tone. Just because you are excited about being there doesn't mean they are. They need a little time to switch from whatever was happening at home, right? Maybe their parents are fighting again. Maybe their dad's drinking again. Maybe their mom just lost her job. You don't know what kind of craziness is coming out of their home. That class meeting can be that ritual that lets them detach from home, connect with their peers, and enter a safe learning place. So it's a great entryway into the classroom, and you will get that time back. Now, class meeting is something you might have heard of. Another very important aspect for relationships is talking. Talking, talking, talking. Kids are going to talk no matter what. You can either get them to talk about what you want them to talk about, or they can talk because you're talking too much and they're just tired of you talking. Kids are going to talk. We process through talking. We learn through talking. So why not leverage that for us and build relationships at the same time? So simple talk structure would be response chaining. One thing that whenever I'm going into classrooms, observing teachers and coaching teachers, that I see that just makes me cringe a little bit is this typical ask and answer. So I have a question, and it might be a really good question. It might be a higher order thinking question. And one student answers, and then boom, I like the answer, then we move on. And while that teacher thinks that the class has gotten it, that teacher's engaged with one person, and only one person has really done some thinking, and the other 21 kids are just staring and not really cognating at all, right? So this typical one ask, one answer, even if you as a teacher get 3 answers, right? You really let multiple students answer. What about the other 18 kids? What about the other 19 kids? It just doesn't work for you to let every single kid answer every single question you ask in whole group. So how do you get them to talk to each other? Right? So what you can do is there's multiple ways that you can use this response chaining, but the idea is you can either do it in whole group, or you could do it in this like smaller groups of 6 or whatever. But the idea is not just to let everyone talk. Here's the twist, right? The twist is as the students answer your question, they should not only respond, but they should respond and link it or chain it, right, to another student's response. So if I'm asking, what was the most influential battle in the Civil War, right? So I'm an 8th grade history teacher, and we've been studying the Civil War, and I throw it out there. My star student raises her hand, and she says, well, the Battle of Gettysburg, right? Because that stopped the Northern invasion. And then somebody else wants to answer. They can either agree, right, and say, I agree with so-and-so. I also think that Gettysburg is the most influential battle because, and they add their own spin on it. But they link their answer to the previous person, and that lets that first star student know they've been heard. And there is nothing more powerful than speaking and feeling like someone is actually hearing you. And we don't do that a lot. A lot of times, even if kids are talking, they're talking past each other and they're waiting for the other person to close their mouth so they can open theirs. So this response chaining also helps them feel heard, but it also provides them an opportunity to practice how we can disagree in a polite way. So maybe someone else thought it was Antietam. Maybe they thought that was the most influential battle. So they can say, I hear what so-and-so says, but I disagree. I think it's Antietam because, and then they give their response. And you're not attacking a person, right? And we can kind of model how we can disagree with someone without shaming them, without going on the attack mode, and how we can take that feedback and even take someone's feedback and say, you know what, I think you're right. I think I might want to change my idea. And so response chaining is just a little tiny thought, but you have to tell kids how to do that. When you answer a question, whether it be in whole group or whether it be in smaller groups, right? For this activity, I want you to chain your responses. Every time you respond, I want you to respond to someone that has spoken previously. So if you're the fifth person speaking, it doesn't always have to be the person that just finished speaking. You can chain it to somebody, 2 people, 3 people ago, but it helps people feel heard and it makes them listen to each other. If they know that their response has to be chained to somebody else, they're listening. And when people are listening, they're building relationships. They're feeling heard. They're feeling connected because this relationships is not just teacher-student, but it's student to student. How can you build stronger relationships between the students in the classroom? And response chaining is just another idea. Now, unfortunately, this is just a 30-minute webinar. These are just 2 ideas. There are a ton more in my books, and I'm going to talk about an online learning module that I have. But here's the big idea for tonight. Relationships act as a multiplier for all instructional practices. So the stronger relationships that you have in the classroom, the stronger that positive climate, and the students trust each other, they can feel vulnerable. It's okay to receive feedback. If they make a mistake, they don't feel shame. That's going to take even the most normal, vanilla instructional practices and just multiply them times 10 because there's that strength. But here's the thing with multiplication. If you multiply by a whole number, it's going to get bigger. But as students get into 5th grade and 6th grade, they realize that not all multiplication results in a larger product. Because if you multiply by a fraction or you multiply by a decimal, your product actually gets smaller. So if you don't have strong relationships, or if you even have some negative relationships, if there's a negative hostile climate in your classroom, you're going to find that all the work and energy you're putting into your instructional practices is getting cut in half, getting cut in a third, and it's just ineffective. Not because the instructional practice is poor, it's because it's being filtered through those relationships, and the kids are saying, I don't feel safe, I don't feel seen, I don't feel trusted, I don't feel like I can be vulnerable in this space. So relationships are just one of the 5 facets of motivation, but it's the foundation. That's where everything starts. So how can you learn more? I mentioned there's an online learning module that I just created. You can find it at the link there, aarondaffern.thinkific.com. Throughout the entire course of these 5 weeks, so it's running through the end of April 2021. It's going to be 50% off the price. It's a 12-hour CPE course, so it's like a 2-day conference, and you can get that for 50% off between now and the end of April 2021. And so that's it's on your own, it's asynchronous, so you can learn tons of resources, tons of videos, a lot more besides just response chaining and class meetings. And then finally, like I shared at the very beginning, I have written 2 books on student engagement. There's that online learning. I do trainings for schools, for districts. And then also there's a really interesting student engagement inventory that I just put together for this particular webinar series. All of that, including the handout, can be found right here at aarondaffern.com/engage. You go to the relationships and you will find handout. Click that, you get this entire slide deck, and you will get all of the links on the very last page. So thank you for joining me this evening. I hope that you will come back next week. It's April 6th, 2021. Same time, 8:30 to 9. But this time we're looking at our third facet of motivation. That is going to be autonomy. That is our voice and choice. How can we motivate kids by giving them a sense of autonomy?